Hi guys, and welcome to Abby Someone. I am Abby. Today I'm going to be going over the books I read in 2024, and hopefully this can help you maybe pick out books for the new year if you want to get in some reading, if you either want to start or you're just looking for other books that you may have not read. So I'm going to be going over the books I read, and hopefully my thoughts and opinions will help you pick whether or not you want to read them. In 2024, I actually read a lot more than I have in the last few years. I didn't log all of them, but on Goodreads, I logged 18 books. And today I'm going to be talking about 14. The reason I'm not going to be talking about 4 of them, because they are very popular, well-known books that have already been talked about. Either I've talked about them or they're just very well-known books. Though, if you're wondering, those 4 books are the first 3 books of Harry Potter. So The Sorcerer's Stone, Chamber of Secrets, and Prisoner of Azkaban. I'm not going to go over those. Those are very well-known books. Very loved them. That's why I read them. And then the 4th one is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which is my favorite book kind of all time. I've read it many times. I think I've talked about it many times, even reviewed it many times on this channel. So I'm not going to go over it again in this video. Obviously, these 4 books are very highly recommended by me and by many other people, so if you haven't read them, check them out. But for the rest, they were either new or mostly new. I'm not going to go in order that I read them. I'm actually going to break them up into 3 different sections, and I will try to split the video down below into the different sections if you want to split to or go to a certain one. But first, I'm going to talk about series, and this is going to be complete series that I read, or majority part of the series that I read, 4 or more books. And then the second part, I'm going to talk about series again, but these are going to be, I only read 1 book of this series, and there's different reasons why. And then last, I'm going to talk about the single off 1 book stories at the end. So if you're interested in a certain type of book, if you want a series, stick around the beginning, or if you don't, maybe some of the other 2 sections is more your interest. So let's kind of get started, and we're gonna start with the series that I read. All right, since we're starting off with series, the first series I'm gonna talk about is the largest one I read, but I didn't technically read all the books this year. I read the second half this year, so that the second half was 4 books. There's 8 books in total, and this series is actually kind of already popular because it is a Netflix adaptation, a very popular Netflix adaptation, and that is the Bridgerton series. I read the last 4 books, which covers the last 4 children, I believe, of the Bridgertons. I read the first 4, I think, last year, and I read the last 4 this year. So I'm gonna just be talking about those 4, but I did finish off the Bridgerton series this year with those 4 books. And these books are by Julia Quinn, and the last 4 cover the kids of Eleanor, Francesca, Hyacinth, and Gregory. I almost forgot his name, Gregory. And in the show, I know they sort of shared a little bit of Eleanor's and Francesca's story. So if you have watched the series, maybe you know a little bit about the books, but obviously the series and the books are different for many reasons. But yeah, I'm gonna be talking about those 4 books, children, stories, whatever you wanna call them, today. So the first one is Eleanor's Story. That is book number 5, and it tells the story of Eleanor and Sir Phillip Crane. And it basically starts with Eleanor running away from her family to go essentially live with Mr. Crane in the countryside at his house, and no one knows. She kind of runs away, doesn't tell anyone, and she's basically only never met this guy, but she has written letters to him. So it's kind of a little bit scandalous to start off with. But I'll kind of, let you read the book or watch the series if you want to know more about her story. But I really liked in here that they added kids to the story. The main male lead already has 2 children. I think they're twins. Yes, yeah, they are twins. And I really like how they covered the interaction between Eleanor and the kids. Eleanor being kind of in the middle of all 8 children. She can handle kids very well, and I thought their interactions were really cute. And they are out in the country, so it does take a while for people to kind of find Eleanor and figure out that she's out there in the country. with this guy and his kids kind of by herself. And then you kind of see what happens with that, because obviously that is not acceptable. But yeah, overall, I really like the story. I gave it 4 stars. I listened to the audiobook version of it, which I really enjoy doing those, mostly because I can do other things while listening, since it is a romance novel. Like, I don't have to listen intensely to know what's going on. So kind of a lot of these I did listen to as audio, and they are very enjoyable. So yeah, I gave Eleanor's story 4 stars, and I think I read this almost a year ago, so right at the beginning of January. And I think soon after I followed with the 6th book, which follows Francesca. And I believe Francesca was like very different from the other stories. It's Francesca and Michael Sterling is the 2 main characters. But her story actually begins with her marrying Michael's cousin. So it's very interesting that she starts off married, and then the love interest comes a lot later, even though he's technically there because it is his cousin. But it is a different little twist kind of to the story, or a regular romance novel. Francesca's first husband does eventually pass away, sadly, but it is very interesting to read about how Julia Quinn dealt with her being a widow, and like her thoughts and feelings about this, and like kind of finding that second love, especially since it is his cousin. But I did enjoy how she kind of went about it and did it. And this book, I believe, covered the most like time difference for like the characters actually interacting. I think that at one point there's like a 5-year span within a couple of chapters, which I did appreciate. And the overall story, after she becomes a widow, she doesn't immediately go right into her next, marriage, love. So yeah, I think it was nice that she put in that long time gap to like give the grieving process and everything for both people. I did really enjoy this book. I think it's probably one of my favorite out of the 8, even though I did end up giving it 4 stars in the end. It's one of the ones I remember the most out of this year, even though I read this more in the beginning of the year. I believe it was like February, March time that I read this, and I did read this as an ebook. I didn't listen to the audiobook. I don't think my library had it, but I read it and I did enjoy it. I liked her story. I liked kind of like the differences between the romance writing style of this one compared to more traditional ones. And I like the character in general. She's a little different from the other Bridgertons. She's a little calmer, and she kind of states that a lot in the book. But yeah, this is probably one of my favorite books of the whole series. So next is the 6th book, and this actually covers the last child of the Bridgertons, which is Hyacinth, and her love interest is Gareth. And Hyacinth has a very strong personality. And coming from Francesca's book, where Francesca's a little calmer, Hyacinth has a very strong, very outgoing personality. So it's very different vibes from the get-go, just with the character, the main character. And this one, I don't remember the plot as much. I know Gareth is related to Lady Danbury, which is one of my favorite characters in the Netflix series. Lady Danbury and Hyacinth are very kind of similar in their very blunt personalities, and they'll say what they want to, and they're like kind of within all the gossip. So I thought their interactions was cute, and that she ends up with her grandnephew. I can't remember overall. Again, I can't remember a lot of this book. I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars, even though I can't remember a lot, but I do remember it being funny. I thought her book was actually pretty funny. I remember laughing at it a lot. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I did enjoy it reading. What I do remember of it is that Gareth is like trying to save his title, not his title, but like his family wealth and everything that his dad kind of ruined. And he finds this journal from his great grandma or something who's from Italy. So it's in Italian, and he needs Hyacinth's help of translating it. And that's how they like interact a lot, is through the translation of this diary, and they're like looking for a treasure of like gems or something. Again, I don't remember as much of this book, but take that as you will. I did enjoy it, or remember enjoying it. So yeah. And then the last story book of this series is for Gregory, which is the second to last child and the last male. And I actually read this fairly recently, I think maybe a month ago. And so I do remember more of it. I don't think I like the plot line as much as some of the others, but I did enjoy the story. I feel like the main lady character, Lucinda, which is Gregory's interest, I do kind of relate. I feel like I related to her the most out of even all the girls, maybe like her and Francesca. So I did like her in that aspect. But throughout this whole book, they talk about like, I don't know, the process of falling in love and like the ideals of love. And sometimes it just really made me laugh because of the kind of like that up in the clouds type of feeling, which isn't untrue, I guess. But yeah, some of them were a little more ridiculous to my thoughts. But that's not to say I didn't like the book. I really enjoyed it overall. I think I gave it 4 stars, just kind of like all the rest of the books. I think there's only one book in the whole series I gave 5 stars. But this one I did enjoy probably the female character the most out of all the books. And this one I did listen to as an audiobook. Again, it was very nice. I think I listened to it mostly on my walks. Very enjoyable. But yeah, that is the last book of the Bridgerton series. I've read all 8 now over the span of the last 2 years. I would say overall, the stories I liked the most were Benedict and Francesca, and then honorable mention of Gregory's, mostly just because I like the female character the most in that. So if you're not wanting to read the whole series, but certain ones, I would say Benedict and Francesca. They were more my style, so if your style fits close to mine, I would suggest those, which I'm really excited. The next Netflix series or season of Bridgerton is Benedict's story. I think he's the main character, so I'm excited to see how they put it on screen, since it was one of my favorite books of this whole series. But overall, I would recommend this series if you are into romance novels. I tend to actually go towards the historical romance novels, so these are just kind of like right up my alley. I wouldn't say they were my favorite out of the ones I've read in total, but I did enjoy them. Obviously, I read all 8 books, watched the series, so yeah, highly recommend them if you are kind of into those types of books. So next I'm going to talk about another series. I read this whole series this year. It is 3 books, and I think I read it in less than 2 weeks, like all 3 books. So if you can kind of get a hint, I really enjoyed the series, and that is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. The 3 books include Once Upon a Broken Heart, The Ballad of Never After, and A Curse for True Love. And with the 3 books, I think I gave the first one 4 stars and then the other 2 5 stars. And like I said earlier, I read all of them in less than 2 weeks, so I enjoyed them immensely. Like, if I was going to suggest a series to read next year or this coming year, I would highly recommend this one. I think I will definitely be reading this series in the future, like a reread. That's how much I enjoyed them. And I really liked Stephanie Garber's writing. She has another series, I believe in the same world as this one in the series, and I really want to read them now. I think it's the Caravel series. I'm not sure on how to pronounce that name, but I believe it's the events leading up to this series. I don't think you have to read them in order, but that series is kind of like on my list of to read in this next year because I enjoyed this series so much. So the whole series follows this one girl, Evangeline Fox, and it starts with her making a deal with the Prince of Hearts after she finds out that her love of her life is marrying her stepsister, and she believes he's under a curse. And she goes to make this deal of like to stop this whole wedding and everything. And that kind of leads to a series of events that don't turn out as she really plans. And this eventually leads her to being taken to this magical kingdom that she's heard of. And she even ends up marrying a prince of this kingdom. And it's kind of like this whole twist and turns of events and this magic and like what's real and what's a plot and who is doing what. It's a very kind of like mystery of like what's going on and what's actually the real deal. Everyone is kind of like under a curse. Or not really a curse, but there's a lot of magic in play within this kingdom that is not really in her original world. But this is a fantasy series and it was really well done. I really enjoyed the world that Stephanie built and the magic, even though not everything's like fully explained. I think that's part of what I like about it. It kind of leaves this mystery to the story, to the world, that doesn't necessarily annoy me. I really liked Stephanie's writing and the plot was good. The characters were great. I love Jax, which is the Prince of Hearts. I think most of everyone who reads these books likes Jax. And the plot had great like twists and turns and kind of kept you on your toes the whole time. Especially in the second book, I believe, The Ballad of Never After. It was really good. I really enjoyed it, and just everything that happens. And it builds upon the other books so well. I believe like after I read the whole series, I went to a bookstore and I saw the second book on the shelf and it was a beautiful cover too, and I almost bought it. I might have to go back and buy it, but I would like to buy the whole series together. Especially living here in a smaller space, I have to be kind of choosy with what books I decide to buy sometimes. So considering that I'm really considering or really thinking about buying these, it tells you how much I really enjoyed them, because I'm only going to buy books that I will definitely reread or, you know, belong to take space in my area. But yeah, overall, fantastic job, Stephanie. I will be reading these again in the future. It was the best series I read this whole year, and the last two probably in the top books that I read this year overall. And I believe I read all three of these as ebooks, you know, and like I said, very quickly, within 2 weeks with working and everything. So yeah, highly, highly, highly recommend if you have not checked them out already. So those are the series I read. Next, I'm going to talk about the series I read that I only read one book of, and they're not necessarily all the first book. The first one I'm going to talk about is actually the second book of a series. It's just the series is still coming out. And that book is Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo, or not Leah, Leigh Bardugo. Her name is kind of hard for me. And this is the second book of the Alex Stern series. The first one is Ninth House, and I read that as it came, like when it was very new. And this one I read not long, I believe it came out more than a year ago, but I tried to read it as soon as I remembered. But this is definitely a series I really like. I can't wait for the next book to come out. And this again follows Alex Stern as she makes her way through college at Yale, but with the magic of the ninth houses and everything that goes through. And it builds nicely on the first book. This book, she has to try to save her mentor love interest from hell that he was sent to, and she has to travel to hell. I think she goes twice in this book, but you continue to learn more about kind of the magic system, kind of under society within this book, and you meet some new characters that I really enjoyed, but you get the old characters too that made the first book just as good. I think both tied really well together in this series. This isn't the first series I read by Bardugo. I really like her writing. It's kind of like a darker feel. All of her writing books are a little darker feel, and I feel like I need to read some more of her books because I've enjoyed all of them that I've read so far. But yeah, if you haven't read Ninth House, I would highly recommend it. Maybe, I know the third book is probably going to come out soon, maybe next year. I will be reading it when it comes out too. I've really enjoyed this series. I like the magic in it. It's very interesting. The character is funny but strong, and yeah, I like just the twists and the turns that come along with what she has to go through and kind of overcome to, you know, accomplish her goals or like fix things that she thinks she messed up. I'm really interested in like what happens next. So like I can't wait for the next book. It's either 2025 or 2026. I'm not really sure, but I know it is coming eventually. And like I said, I really like her writing, this author's writing, and so I will be trying to read other books and series that she's written. She has a lot out there so far, and I will look forward to the next book in this series coming out. So the next book I'm going to talk about took me a while to read. I believe I actually started it in 2023, and then finished it in 2024. Took a long break. But it is the first book of a 3-book series, and I believe all the books are out. And from the first book, I did enjoy it, but I think it will take me a while to figure out if I actually want to continue this series or not. The book is Fireborne by Rosaria Munda. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right, but this is the Aurelian Cycle series. And I read this book because I heard it was very similar to Fourth Wing, just with less like romance aspects to it. So it has dragons, it has magic, and this like dragon school, and a main girl, main boy who are like fighting, or kind of like enemies to lovers or friends to lovers in this book, sort of. But it had less of the heavy romance of Fourth Wing. So I tried it out and I did enjoy it. I did like the world overall. Sometimes I think I read the books too close together. I get them confused of like which dragon world, which warring dragon world there is. So that's kind of, I guess, why I was hesitant to finish it or continue the series, because I do confuse them in my mind of what story I'm actually reading, or like what I remember from the story, whether it belongs to Fourth Wing or Fireborne, because they are kind of very similar. They're not exactly the same, but they are similar. But I did like the world she did build in this. It's like after a war/revolution, and it's the implementation of a new system, but the main boy is actually an aristocrat from the old system, hiding. Like he got put into an orphanage and he was small enough and he just kind of slipped through the cracks, and now he's still rising in, I guess, the ranks of this new system, and they're about to go war with the other aristocrats or his family that fled and are trying to come back and take over. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting dynamics, and he has to make a lot of choices of which side he's gonna pick, the new system and the old system, his family, or, you know, everything he's grown to actually kind of like or not like about the system. And, you know, there's good points and bad points to both, obviously. So there's a lot of, like, I don't know, moral dilemmas for him. And it was very interesting. I think I give the story 4 stars overall, but like I said, it took me a while to read, and I'm still a little iffy if I'm going to continue or not just right now, because I also want to read other books in the Fourth Wing series as they come out, and those are big books, and I just don't want to confuse them anymore. So I'm hesitant on this one, but I did enjoy it overall. All right, so the last book I'm going to talk about that is only one of a series is The Night Ends with Fire by KX Song. And this is, I believe, a fairly new book. I think it came out in 2024. But this is a retelling of Mulan, or an adaptation of Mulan's story. And you can tell that, I mean, you have the main girl. Her name's not Mulan, but it's like Maylin or May something. And there's definitely like characters you can match up to the Mulan story if you know it very easily. And she goes undercover to save, I don't know, her family, herself, and goes to serve as a man in the war, and that's something that's not allowed. And she eventually falls in love with in the book, he's a prince. I think in like the movie, it's just like the commander's son, but same character, you know, high up ranking person. But the difference in this is like there's more characters, some I really enjoyed that she added. There's also this element of like magic and such. Sad part, there is no Mushu. Mushu's my favorite, so a little sad. But there's this element of magic and like controlling of fire and I think earth or water, but like her and like a few other main characters have like control of the elements. But yeah, there's this political system's different. There's more people within this war that she's going to fight for than just, you know, China and the Huns. So it is the Mulan story, but it's very different. And I did enjoy this. I think I gave this book a 4 stars, and I probably will read the rest of the series as they come out. This is the first book, and I believe the other ones have not come out, or they're coming out in later years. So I would recommend this, but maybe wait until like at least the second book's out. But out of all these 3 series where I read one book, I would probably recommend the Alex Stern series the most, and then The Night That Ends with Fire, and then Fireborne. All of them are fairly good. I gave 5 stars to the Alex Stern Hellbent story, and then 4 stars to the other 2. But yeah, those are all the books I read that are within a series, but I only read one book within that series, and I did enjoy these all overall. Probably Hellbent the most, and I would probably put Hellbent higher up on the list of all my books that I read this year. Okay, so the last 4 books I'm going to talk about are books that are standalone stories. They are not part of the series, so it's just one story. And some of these are kind of some of my favorite books I read this year. The first one I'm going to talk about is called Welcome to Hyunam-dong Bookshop by Hwang Bo-rum. And I remember when I first moved to Korea, this book was very high talked about. At the time, it had just released in Korean. It is a Korean author, a Korean book, and I remember it being really talked about at that time. And then in 2024, I found a translated version of it, and so I picked it up kind of immediately just because I had heard so much about it and it seemed like a book I would like. So this story is a very calm read, very realistic with the characters and what happens within it. And it basically follows the story of many different people that either run this bookshop, who is the main character, but also about the other customers and people who work there and interact with her throughout many months, and kind of like their stories and what they go through throughout this time. I think this book focuses more on like people and their relationships and like the kind of more day-to-day how we get through life kind of story, where you can more take away from the story about how to improve your life or live your life. I wouldn't say it's a very self-help book, but it is very almost healing. Call it more of a healing book. Again, it's a very calming read. There's not really any action in it, but I really enjoyed the characters that she wrote in this book and their different stories and different struggles that they kind of work through or go through. And some of them are very lost, some of them are figuring it out, some of them are completely changing their lives. So it's very interesting just to see each character build and change throughout the whole book, and either their thoughts or the actions that she shares through this story. I do believe this was the author's debut novel. I really enjoyed her writing and her style. I think I will read future stories that she puts out as they maybe get translated or not, as they get translated and I can read them. But yeah, I ended up giving this story 5 stars. I would recommend it. It almost gave like the Midnight Library kind of vibes, but in a very different way. So if you like that book, I would recommend this. You might like the vibes of this one too, but definitely more calmer, life, realistic centric related book and story, but probably one of my favorites from this year. So the next book I'm going to talk about has a very different vibe from that one, but it is probably one of my favorite books I read this last year. It's like a murder mystery historical kind of book. It's written by a Canadian Korean, and she definitely knows Korean history and has researched it and everything, and that is The Red Palace by Jane Hur. And this was actually the only physical book I read this year. I actually don't have it right now because my friend is borrowing it because I recommended it to her and she took it to go read. So yeah, this story is kind of like a murder mystery. It's set in the Joseon period of Korea, and it's very linked with like royalty and like who did it. Could be very well be the prince. But the main character follows is a palace nurse, and she's like very good at her job, but one of her fellow nurses, or couple of her fellow nurses, have been murdered. And so she goes on this quest to like figure out who did it or why, and she eventually links up with this detective guy, and they kind of have a small romance, but that is obviously not the main part of the story. And a lot of the clues and things leads to different suspects, but one of the main suspects is the crown prince. And the author even mentions that this is kind of based off of a real prince, like a real story that's in Korean history. So I think it's very interesting that she added like this element to it. Obviously it's not exact retelling, but again, that's why it's called The Red Palace. Now, there's murder involving the prince or not. And I really liked the mystery of this novel. It kind of kept me on my toes of like who actually is the murderer until the very end. But she goes around it very well. I will definitely read some of her other books that she's done. I did like her writing. It's also, you know, she uses a lot of Korean history, and since I live in Korea, I'm very interested in that type of thing. So I did pick up one of her other books that I plan on reading in this next year. And also, like, I realized I like murder mysteries. I don't read them a lot, but this one and some of the others I know that I read, I really enjoyed. So I don't know why I don't read them more often. So maybe I'll try to do that in this next year. But I really love this book. I obviously gave it 5 stars. I recommended it to my friend. I recommended it to my family to read. So I definitely want to recommend it to you. It's probably in the top 2 or 3 books that I read this year. I haven't actually ranked them in my mind, but it's definitely up there as one of my favorites from this past year. Okay, so the second to last book I'm going to talk about is called The Foxwife by Yangzi Cho. But I listened to this as an audiobook on my walks, and I'm going to tell you, there were some moments I was very captivated by this book. It did take me a little bit longer to read, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I gave it 5 stars in the end. And this story involves a fox, or a gamino as we call it here in Korea, but the story is based in northeastern China, so not far from Korea. It takes place there and also in Japan, and this legend is kind of throughout all of East Asia, so China, Japan, and Korea. So I know a little bit of background about the legend already, but basically these foxes, they're called 9-tailed foxes. They can transform into a fox and also be human, but they're these very alluring, charismatic beings, basically because they feed off of people, and they also live a very long time unless they're killed. So they kind of have to live on the edges of society, even though they are these very gorgeous, alluring people or beings. But our main character, she starts off by going back kind of into society to basically get revenge on this one person who killed someone else. Don't want to reveal who it was, but it is kind of a sad story at some points, but overall just very good. It deals with her overcoming kind of some grief at whether she wants it through revenge or not, and kind of tracking down this guy that she has wronged her in the past. And it leads her to bumping into other foxes that have been in her past before. She knows them. Obviously there's not a lot of them, but this book actually has 2 kind of main characters, the fox lady and also this detective, and he's like an older man, but he has the ability to hear people telling lies. And he has somehow gotten this from interacting with foxes in his past. And this story actually flips between each chapter the views of the fox and the detective. So it's very interesting to see both sides of how they're like interacting with the world and how they're slowly coming together until they eventually meet. And I really enjoyed this part of the book, how they like changed back and forth between their perspectives, because it takes until the end till they meet and actually kind of talk to each other or get to know each other, and the build up and like how their lives are very connected in many different ways. But I really enjoyed this story and her writing. I don't know if she has other books out or not, but I really liked this one, and I'll look into maybe reading some of her other ones. I liked the history and the lore kind of put into the story. Again, the nine-tailed fox legend is kind of within all Eastern Asian cultures, so I really liked the inclusion since it's something I kind of know about living here in Korea. And it was also cool, the places that she talks about in the story are places that are actually not that far from where I am. Also, the timing of the story, it's in the early 1900s with the kind of change of China politically, and then the invention of like photographs and different ways of communicating and everything, and how she deals with this actually, since she is a being that lives for a very long time and she has to kind of keep hidden. These kind of are new things she has to be aware of and keep away from. So it's very interesting how she relates that to the story too, with the timing that they are currently set in the novel. But overall, I really enjoyed the characters, enjoyed the plot. I would recommend this book. I wouldn't say it was in my top favorite book of this year, but I did enjoy it more than some others that I read. All right, so the last book I'm going to talk about, I was actually kind of debating if I wanted to include this. It is a book, but I would say it's a spark notes of a different book. This is actually written for children or like younger kids. So I think it's part of like a series. It's called Classic Starts. So the story it's based off of, or kind of retelling, is the Monkey King from China. I forget his name, but it's a very famous tale from China, and it's like the whole book is, or book series of books is like thousands and thousands of pages. So this book, or this story, is only about 100. So it's a very condensed, very watered down version of this grand tale from China, but I think that's the whole point of it. It's kind of like a Sparks Notes. Like I said, tells you highlights, tells you characters. But overall, I did kind of enjoy it. I read it very quickly within like 2 afternoons, and it's a great intro to the story. Maybe one day I'll get around to actually reading the whole series story. But again, that's a lot of pages to read. And also it's hard to find like a translation of it. And this book, it was missing a lot of, you know, pieces of the story. But again, it was only 100 pages out of like thousands that it is originally. That's why I keep saying it's like a Sparks Notes. It tells you the main points, the main characters, and the main things that happen. But it's very brief, very hit the main points to go to the next point. So basically I know all the major happenings of this tale, but I don't know details. But I did enjoy it. It's a good reference point since I only knew the very basics before reading this. So now I know a little bit more about the tale. It's a very famous tale from China. So I wouldn't say it was a complete waste of time to read, but I guess I would recommend this more to younger audiences. That's who it was written for, unless you just want to hear the very summary telling of the Monkey King tale from China. And very good if you want to introduce like very famous long tales to children or teens. And this is a good format to do that. I think overall I gave it 4 stars because it wasn't a bad read. It was just knowing that it wasn't fully telling the whole story. I just drew it back a little bit. Okay, so that was the 14 books that I read this year. Overall, I think it was a really good year of reading. I enjoyed almost all the books that I read. I think all of them I either gave 4 or 5 stars. I think some might have been on the fence of 3, but I don't think I actually gave any rankings of 3. So yeah, I hope this kind of helps you pick books for this upcoming year if you haven't read any of these. If you have read some of these, let me know down in the comments your thoughts, and if you would suggest some of the ones I didn't like as much to other people, let me know. But yeah, I really hope to keep reading and read even more coming into 2025. I definitely have more time this year to read. I'm not doing as much or certain things that I did in 2024. I like rearranged my schedule, and I'm not doing certain things that I was in 2024 that I'm not continuing into 2025. So hopefully I have more time to read, and I'll make it more of a priority, and I'll let you guys know which books I read, what I like, what I don't like going forward. Also, if you have suggestions of what I should read, let me know. I do follow some like booktubers and people on Instagram that recommend books, and the ones that I found that I have similar enough reading styles to, so I'm always looking at them. I have like a list of ones I already want to read, but I'm always open for suggestions depending on my mood, changes on what I want to read. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it was informational to you if you're looking for books to read. But yeah, those were the books I read in 2024, and I hope to have a good year of more reading in 2025. But I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, remember, if you want to be someone, why not be you? Bye!